Hello.
Hi, everyone.
Hi, Gwanya.
Yeah, thank you for
Hi,
joining.
Alexi. Yep.
I found that Mario is not online, so I'm not sure if he can join us.
Did he respond, or I mean, did you get a notification that he accepted your calendar invite?
I found that he only posted doodle.com and he identified that today is a good time for him, but he didn't respond my calendar, my invitation yet.
So that, generally, see, the US folks, they do not check their mails and all on the weekend. When did you send the calendar invite? I don't really remember
Oh,
that.
uh, yeah, I think that I sent the calendar today and I input.
Oh, okay. So I think you sent it on Sunday, huh?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, they might have not have checked it. So
Oh,
I
sorry.
saw
Yeah.
the doodle. I saw the doodle before this, so I think he's okay with tomorrow's 8 p.m. also, Maru. So um, just respond to that. I'll respond to your invite and mention that we'll
Yeah,
be
but
expecting you there in tomorrow's meeting.
I found that Alex may not able to attend tomorrow.
No,
Yeah.
Oh,
no,
okay.
no, it's okay. I can attend. Just say that it's not suitable, but it's okay. I will join.
Oh, okay, great.
Yeah.
Cool. Alexi, what I'll do, I'll respond to that calendar mail that I got from Gwangya,
Yeah.
and I'll PM Maru also to confirm if he'll join or not. Okay.
Okay.
So,
Yeah, so
and mhm.
yeah, so you mean that I need to reschedule the meeting to tomorrow, same time?
Yeah, yeah, I think so.
Okay. Okay,
Okay, it's
sure.
see, if you haven't received the accepted invite from a person, we cannot really expect him to be joining
Yeah,
in this point,
yeah.
right? So
Okay, sure,
we
sure.
need to poke him. Okay.
Okay, okay.
And apologies for your trouble, man. I mean, I'm sorry. It's a little difficult to once the meetings and times are accepted by people. After that, it's easy to get in sync and all that. But initially, these kind of hiccups can happen.
Yeah.
It's okay.
Okay. Yeah, fine. So, uh,
Hmm.
uh, but we hope that you can post some comments in our Google Doc. Alex,
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
yeah. Alex,
I'll
so
I'll I'll do that.
I found that you have a slide that you want to share with us today.
Yeah, why not?
Alex?
We can have a short look at that. Maybe we can keep the meeting short, and if you have something
Oh,
to talk or present, we can have a look at that. What do you say,
that's
Alexi?
great. Alex, so,
Excuse me. Oh, somebody joining.
Paul
No,
is
I
also
think
online. Yeah,
Paul might be there.
cool.
Hi, Paul.
Hey guys, how's it going?
Hey, Paul, thanks for joining.
Hello.
You're welcome.
Great,
Okay,
great. We were
then,
missing you.
yeah, then I think that maybe we can continue.
Yeah, I'm sorry to have joined late. I hope I
Yeah, I
didn't
think
interrupt.
I'll.
Hi, Quentin.
Hi everyone, sorry I'm late.
Great. Hello, Quentin. Okay, seems we don't have Mario yet, but I found that he's not online yet. So
That's okay. We can
yeah,
continue without him probably,
okay, that's
given we
great.
have presence of other people.
Yeah, it's
Okay,
being recorded, so Maru will be able to watch later on.
okay, sure.
And
Alex, so can you please share?
by the way, if it's recording where it will be published, it will be in the group. How we can access it as a record?
I want to say that if I understand correctly, it's automatically posted to a YouTube list, but I would need to verify that if no one else has more specific information.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, Paul, I think we need to reconfirm that with Jonathan. So what used to happen is that the meetings are automatically recorded and they are accessible to few admin folks of this meeting list. And Jonathan used to publish them. So
Okay.
yeah, cross-check
We'll
that.
have to track that down.
Yeah, correct.
Just out of curiosity, who I get emails saying they've been posted somewhere, but who actually publishes them at the moment? Did anyone take that over from Jonathan?
I was under the impression that there was an automated process, Quentin.
So they are on YouTube.
I believe so, but I'm going to go check now, so we'll find out.
Okay, cool.
That's what I'm trying to specify, that I think that they are not being posted as of now. So we need to track that with Jonathan. Hello.
Yeah, I can still hear you.
Okay. Alexei, why don't you go ahead? You were going to talk about something.
Okay, no problem. So, do we want to start with the pool or with federated read?
Let's do pool first, if you don't mind.
Oh, okay, sure. Let me share my desktop.
Actually, it's maybe it's better that you will start to share. Yeah.
Yeah. So can you see my desktop now?
Yes.
Okay, great. So I have just the updated document of pool mode based on comments from Maru, from Quentin, from Irfan. So we can take a look at it. So first we can take a look at the background. So the background, I have just the diagram here. So from here you can see that basically we want to handle the case when the member clusters don't have inbound network from the federation control panel. So this means that the federation control panel will not able to push data to the member clusters. So that's why I want to make sure that we should have the pull mode, so that the member cluster can just pull some data from some repos, and then it can do some operations. So this is the background of the use case.
Okay, before we go any further, I just wanted to, I still don't actually understand why we need any of this.
Oh, okay.
So maybe I can just prefix it with, if indeed neither of the, so there is a cluster that the Federation control plane is running in, and there is a cluster that the controlled clusters are running in, or there are clusters.
Yeah.
First of all, there's a big distinction between the nodes in the control plane, or the nodes in a cluster not being accessible from the internet versus the API server not being accessible. So I think you need to clarify that. Secondly, if that is the case, another alternative, if both of the clusters are completely inaccessible from the internet, but have outbound internet connectivity, they can just connect at a rendezvous point, being any computer on the internet, and proxy via that rendezvous point. So I'm not saying you shouldn't do this. I'm just saying that if the only reason I've seen here is that the machines are not contactable, First of all, the machines in clusters don't need to be contactable, only the API servers do. And even if that is the case, there is a much, much simpler way of solving the problem. So unless you have other good reasons for doing this, yeah, I'd like to understand what other reasons there are, if any. If there are no other reasons, it's probably not worth building.
Yeah. Good. So you mean that beside the pool mode, we still have some other solutions which can help this?
Well, so any two machines that do not have inbound connectivity can communicate with each other by connecting via some other intermediate machine in the form of a proxy. And then they have a connection between themselves.
Oh yeah, so you mean that the customer can always using some kind of like proxy, like VPN, to make sure that the federation control panel can access the API server?
It doesn't. It could be a VPN, or it could be any other form of proxy. Yes, there is any. Yes, there are many, many ways to do it.
Oh yeah.
And you don't need to build any software for that.
Yeah, right. So here we are just trying to propose one solution without VPN, because sometimes the customer may don't want to set up a VPN between different clouds or different clusters.
Yeah, but this doesn't involve a VPN.
Yeah.
So if you have a machine behind a firewall, as you probably do, and I have a machine behind a firewall, if we both connect to some third machine sitting anywhere out on the internet, then we have a connection. Oh
yeah, right. Actually, the pool mode is trying to use kind of third-party machines or third-party repos to connect the federation control panel and the member cluster.
Yeah, I understand that, but there's a lot of software being built here. And what I'm saying is the other solution does not involve any software being built at all. So that's what I would like to clarify before we go into the detail of all of this. I don't currently see any purpose to building anything here. And I'm not saying that as a criticism. I'm just saying I might be misunderstanding something, but there appears to be no reason to build or review this.
I have a question. Actually, you are right. From technical point, we can create some kind of proxy, we can create a VPN or some other solutions. But from security or enterprise regulations, there may be incoming connections are not allowed at all. It's not just VPN or proxy. They don't allow to connect. To create inbound connections. So only outbound connections can be allowed.
But that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
That's what I'm saying. So in your proposal, you're creating an outbound connection to GitHub and another outbound connection to GitHub, one from the federation control plane and one from the cluster.
Yeah.
So if you replace GitHub and all the software that you're using to do that with any machine with an SSH server running on it, you have also a solution where both of those parties are creating outbound connections. They're just SSH connections instead of anything else. And there's no software involved.
Quentin, I think what you're saying is that we can use a rendezvous point and create a tunnel through it where both the cluster, the federation cluster, and all of the remote clusters connect via that rendezvous endpoint, meaning from their perspective, it's all outgoing connections, not incoming connections, and that solves the problem.
Correct.
Okay. Have we considered the use of disconnected operations, where the remote clusters may be disconnected, they need to have stuff locally? Is that also relevant here? Or is that a completely different issue?
They already have stuff locally. I'm not totally sure I understand the question.
I'll clarify. I think that any kind of a rendezvous point sort of assumes that the remote clusters are going to be up and running at the time where the federated control plane tries to connect to them. If they're disconnected at that point, is the federated control plane going to try in the background to connect every so often?
Yes, it does that. Yes, it is designed to do that. Exactly.
Okay, so I think that the proposal here sort of has a buffer between the federation cluster and the remote clusters in the form of GitHub, which means that you can decouple their lifetime and online behavior. I don't know if that's something that's important enough to do, and I guess you're saying that it's not because it can be done with the current federation controller.
Yes. And that isn't actually stated as a requirement. So if that is a strong requirement, then we should. There is definitely a requirement in the federation control plane's design that any given cluster may be uncontactable at any point because networks go down, clusters go down, etc. That's the main aim of federation, is to handle those situations, which is ever so slightly different than a something like GitHub solution, where in fact there is no requirement that they ever be up at the same time. But I think the chances of that are, that you can hypothetically think of a situation where you bring up the federation control plane, it makes a bunch of decisions, it sends all of that to GitHub somewhere, and then shuts down for good before the other cluster ever comes up. And then the cluster comes up, gets all the stuff out of GitHub and does its thing. So a proxy approach would not support that, but it's not clear that that is a realistic requirement.
I don't think it is, and we're not trying to solve hypotheticals.
Yeah.
Yeah. Quentin, you may also see that in the Federation WG API, we already have the design here. We also want to use kind of pull mode, such as we can just generate some YAML templates and then push it into GitHub repo, and then the member cluster can pull this data from here and then run it.
I'm aware of this diagram. I raised the same question when that was put on this diagram. And it wasn't answered there either, as far as I'm aware. Yeah. If you go to the top of this document, I don't think that thing is in the document at the top, the diagram at the top. So I think Paul took the maybe he did add it. Okay. But anyway, the point remains, it doesn't matter what's on a document. The point is, do we have a requirement for it?
Yeah, actually, I also post an email in the dev list, and I got some comments from Paul and from you. And I think that let me show the email as well. I just posed the question in C multi-cluster, and yeah, I got some response from you, and also got some comments from Paul, and based on some discussion with Paul, and we come to the solution that we want to use kind of pull mode, and we want to introduce GitHub as the third-party repo so that we can leverage it as a.
Okay, won't you just scroll back up to my email? I don't remember exactly what I said there.
Oh yeah.
So
you said that, yeah, you just said that you are not clear about the use case here.
Exactly. So I'm saying it again. If Paul wants to investigate it, which he did, and he's here now, maybe he can explain what the purpose is. I guess I'm not saying we can't build this. I'm just saying that I don't understand why we're building it. And I said that before, and I'm saying it again.
Yeah. So I am interested in exploring the modularity aspect of this. I have no immediate need for any pull reconciliation device, but one of the precepts of like Federation V2 for us at Red Hat was that you shouldn't have to accept a part of it that you would prefer operate in some other way. And so I'm interested in having that concept explored if people want to add features to Federation that you know, that they have a purpose for, regardless of whether I think it is a purpose that I have or a use case that I have. I think you should be able to adapt, you know, along the lines of like fairly coarse-grained modules, adapt different pieces of software into Federation. So if there's a use case, for example, for one of the things that's been said in this call, you have, let's see, to me, the network one, I'm not familiar enough with the specifics of the use case around that, but a strong one for me is like, say that you have, say that you're going to spin up a new cluster and you want to pull its information in from some location or treat clusters themselves as like replicas of one another. That seems to me like a valid enough use case to explore it. I don't have an immediate need for this, in case it's not perfectly clear though. So
okay, so I share your spirit, Paul, in that if people have reasons to build things, whether or not we agree with them, they should have the mechanism to build them. And there's no question that someone could build this thing. I just personally haven't heard anyone say anything that leads me to believe that there is a need for such a thing. Not that I don't think
there has been
need. I just
call
haven't
for it.
heard anybody say anything to me yet. And I'm trying to get someone to say something that says, we need one of these things.
Quentin?
Yeah.
So the motivation for putting like a configuration generator into the YAML diagram in the README was that we did have people in Federation V1 saying, I don't really want to give like control over my clusters to something that really represents a central point of failure and is administratively maybe not something that I'm willing to accept. And so there's not like a direct, like there's nobody hammering saying we need this right now. It was more kind of like forward looking when we're designing this. We want to make sure that the people who said we can't use Federation in its current form, we give them kind of an avenue to using it if they decide it's something that they want to do. I'm not suggesting that's a reason for implementing it now, but at some point in the future, there may be a call for it.
Yeah. I mean, that sounds like a different reason, and I can understand that. So again, if we just look into that a little more detailed, so I think what you're saying is that you're replacing GitHub as your central, so you're replacing the Federation control plane as a central point of failure with GitHub.
Well, when we say GitHub, that's kind of a dependency that I would never have suggested. The point is that if you
assume for now we're talking about GitHub. I think in your diagram it does actually say GitHub pusher.
My diagram?
The one that was just on the screen a minute ago. I might be wrong, but I'm pretty sure that's what it said.
If that was the case, that was certainly an error. The intention was to use Git as something that, you know, it's a file system based solution. So if you were to write any replicatable file system.
Yeah, that's the diagram I'm talking about. YAML generator Git repo.
Git repo. So that's different than GitHub, because a Git repo can be trivially like replicated via distributed file system.
Oh, I see what your distinction is. I understand now.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
But like I said, that's kind of a hypothetical, like trying to solve a problem that seemed to prevent people from wanting to use Federation, not saying that we have an immediate need or people calling for it. I'm not trying to conflate it with the use case being described.
Okay. So I think we're back again where we started, which is, do we have a use case that justifies a fairly significant number of people reviewing a fairly long document, and presumably some code to come later? Nobody's going to stop anyone from building things, but I'm personally resistant to spending large amounts of time reviewing things for which we haven't identified a use case.
Yeah, and just to be clear, there is no need that if someone wants to prototype pull reconciliation, that has to happen in the Federation v2 repo. Like,
yeah, I agree.
One thing that I would very much support is, of what we've prototyped so far, determining what is a function of just the push reconciler, and just drawing really crisp lines around that functional area so that it's clear if you want to write another reconciler or explore another, reconciliation idea, that you've got a clear point that you can say, okay, here's where the rest of Federation ends, and here's where what's really a function of the push reconciler begins.
And just to be clear, I'm not in any way trying to stand in the way of this thing or refusing to review it. I'm trying to help the authors of the design document to not build something that nobody will use, because I haven't heard any concrete use case for it now. But if there's a need for it and somebody wants to build it, have at it, for sure. I have no objection to that. I haven't heard a need yet.
Yeah, I would concur. I don't honestly think that the use case described could best be solved by writing a bunch of software. As Paul said, if someone wants, if you guys want to go build this, you can do it without putting into the Federation repo. And I think I share your concern, Quentin, that, given that this isn't an immediate priority, and we do have a lot of other things that aren't priority, like devoting time and energy even to reviewing it or to accepting something to maintain it indefinitely, that seems like not something that I would suggest doing at this time.
So maybe, Guang, maybe you could clarify where the requirement came from. Did it come from your understanding of the document that
No.
I guess
Actually,
did it come from a customer, or did it come from your? Yeah, maybe you can just explain who expressed.
So currently the requirement was from some customers, and like what I clarified here, because some of the member clusters don't have the inbound network, so we need to make sure that we have the pull mode, so that the member cluster can just pull some data from the Federation control panel or from some other places.
So the requirement is a cluster whose API server
is not accessible,
and nodes are not accessible.
Yeah, right.
Different things here. So most clusters, their nodes are not accessible. That's not really a special cluster. That's a normal cluster. Most nodes, most clusters have an API point that is accessible.
Yeah, right. But
most of them get out onto the internet via a load balancer if they need to get out on or expose themselves on the internet via a load balancer, and that's what we have ingress and services, etc. in Kubernetes for. So most clusters are not accessible from the internet, the nodes.
Yeah, right. But from the customer's description, they don't want to expose the API server externally because of some security issues, so that they only want to make the cluster can only pull some data from external, and they don't want to make any inbound data accessing the cluster. So this is a major concern and requirement from the customer. Yeah.
Sorry, let me just understand that again. They do not want the API servers accessible. Okay, I understood that. What was the second one?
The second one is that the reason that they don't want people to access the API server is because of some security reasons. So they only want the API server can be accessed inside the member clusters, and they don't expose any external endpoint to make the API server to be accessed. And another thing that
you realize that that's not possible. So when you start up a cluster, it's got nothing running in it. And so you have to have it accessible from outside of the cluster to run things in it.
Yeah, I mean that if the customer wants to access the API server in the member cluster, and then the user should be inside the network of member cluster, but they cannot be outside the network of the member.
Okay, the network. Okay, now I understand you. Okay, so that seems fine. And as I said, there are, as per the email that I sent out a few weeks ago, there are many ways to address that requirement.
Yeah.
And most of them don't require writing any code. One of them is to put the current component, move it from out of the control plane into the cluster, and then it just works. And the other way is to just put this proxy point in between the two, which is basically an SSH server.
Yeah, right.
So have you considered those options to address the customer's requirements?
Yeah, as I just clarified here, we can definitely use some proxy or use some VPN, but based on the customer feedback, because of some security reasons, and they don't want to use those technologies. They want to make sure that the member cluster can pull some data. Yeah, this is our requirement.
I guess my comment here would be, there are so many different ways of allowing access in a safe way to these clusters, and that would require configuration. And what you're describing is, a solution that is going to require a lot of code, and that code has to be maintained. And so this is doesn't seem a super great use of energy. If a customer is incapable or unwilling to use existing technology and they want you to build something, that's fine. But I don't think that suggests imposing a burden of maintenance on the Federation development group. But that's not to say if you want to build it. I mean, like I said, the way that Federation is constructed, I mean, all the communication is via the API. So if you wanted to implement this in a separate repo and have it run,
Go for it, yeah.
The push reconciler and run your own controller, that's entirely an option. It just wouldn't be something I think that we'd want to see in the Federation repo at this time.
Yeah, and I think that we really can, we can and maybe should do something to clarify where the rest of Federation ends and where push reconciliation begins. And when I say clarify, I don't necessarily mean writing software. If I have an accurate picture of everything in my head, I don't necessarily think we would need to do that, but maybe just like a written document for, hey, if you want to replace this part of the system, this is what you should do. Like I said, I think it's really important for the overall long-term success of Federation that people should be able to use it in the ways that they want to do. And so I'm tending to look at this from more of a standpoint of allowing extension than necessarily, if I have a use case for X or Y thing, just so my point of view is clear.
Yeah, I agree with you.
Yeah, so you mean that the current use case is not strong enough to do this product, or?
You guys can do whatever you like. I would not pay someone to build this software myself. I would go and talk to the customer and find out why they think a proxy is less secure than pushing things into GitHub. I don't know if they proposed the push into GitHub option or not, but it's not clear to me that there's any good reason to push it into GitHub. There are other reasons, to be clear, that where such a thing might make sense. For example, if you wanted users to review changes before they went into clusters and approve them, then I could see some reason why GitHub might be a good place to be able to say, oh, here's what is going to go into the cluster, and before it goes in there, some human needs to actually merge the change or something like that. That would seem like a not ridiculous use case, but that doesn't seem like your use case here.
But by the way, it's not just justified maybe with the full development, but additional advantages of using GitHub. It's history and rollback. You can see all these changes.
Yes, but I don't see that in the document anywhere. So again, I mean, there may be some reasons that there are other ways of doing that as well. I mean, we have logs in Federation, so you have the history. Maybe you prefer the GitHub history. I agree. Rollback is useful for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just add, like, I think that there are some really interesting possibilities that you could get from writing into a Git repo, like GitHub aside. For example, one thing that I believe we could find some advantage to, if people were willing to do it, and like I wouldn't do this necessarily just to do it, but it's something that has come to mind, is that kubeapplyr is a really popular tool, seemingly, for configuring workloads and resources in a cluster. And I would imagine that there are people that are already using kubeapplyr, that if Federation can write to something that kubeapplyr can use, would more easily integrate Federation into their community of practice around Kubernetes. But that's mostly me just kind of speculating. Yeah, one thing that I'm sensing here, just to share this, is that a lot of times it can be very possible to have a use case that seems like perfectly evident within your group or your organization, but that you have trouble articulating to folks that are outside of that context. And I think that might be happening here. And I think that is one of the things that is sort of pregnant in this conversation. So I'd be happy to have another chat a little bit more focused on, like, the requirements ends of this, if people are interested in doing that, and offer myself as, like, a sounding board for, like, exploring the motivations a little bit more and seeing if there's a way that, like, we're perhaps talking past one another, and there's a use case here that people would be more broadly interested in if it was articulated in kind of a first-class way. I'd be happy to do that.
Yeah. Okay, Paul, so you mean that we need to get more concrete use case from customer for?
Well, I'm kind of hearing that there's something missing from the way the use case has been articulated right now that might be present in your minds or in the context that you have that perhaps isn't making it into this document. So I'm only saying I'd be happy to have, like, a more detailed conversation that focuses more on the requirements ends of it than, like, the Federation technology aspect of it. And, you know, a lot of times having that kind of outside perspective can be really helpful for finding the pieces of information that make the difference between, you know, okay, you can do this, or wow, I actually want the same thing as you do. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So we're at a little bit over half time now. I wonder if people want to use the remaining time in this meeting to talk about the query API, because I believe that was also on the agenda for today.
Yeah.
And it seems like that's an area where we probably have broader agreement on the motivation. So that might be a productive thing to use time on in the remaining time we have today.
So, Paul, you mean that for the pool mode, we still need more discussion about this?
Well, you know, I don't necessarily think that we need to, in the sense that, like, what I'm hearing on the call is that no one has any objection to anybody prototyping an idea that they have. I certainly don't, and like I said, I am very interested in making sure that we build something that's modularized to the extent that if you want to replace a piece of it, that you can do that easily. And so I don't think anybody is saying don't explore this idea. I think what I'm hearing from other people on the call is that they're not convinced that it's a use case that they feel like in your place they would want to develop software for. And so I think the takeaway from this part of the discussion is probably two-part, is that one, we're very interested in having people prototype things around Federation, and we don't necessarily need those to happen in the Federation v2 repository. And then also that that there is a little bit of I think I'm hearing a desire to help folks see if there are ways that they can achieve this use case without writing new software. But, you know, again, I don't think that we've really captured probably the full list of important aspects about the use case, because I'm just hearing a little bit of a disconnect on that. And so the second point I would say is that I'm very happy to offer, you know, myself as like a sounding board or just an outside perspective if we maybe want to have like a smaller conversation that's more focused on the use case here. Yeah. Does that make sense?
Yeah, sure. Okay, so yeah, I think so. If we want to build this into another repo, and then you mean that I can just build it in my own repo, or
yeah,
other places?
This is kind of what I was referring to by having some guidance for people that want to extend or replace parts of Federation. I think it would probably be really productive to, I'm not in an area with a whiteboard today, but this seems like if we can add a whiteboard to the discussion as a tool, maybe on both ends, so we can draw some, you know, some representative pictures of like both the context and what the customer wants, and then also kind of like whiteboard what it would look like to prototype another reconciler for Federation. I think that might be a good exercise to do, and I'd be happy to do that with you.
Oh, okay, sure. Great. And then I think that's the first thing that I need to do is that I will get more detail for the requirement and for the use case here, so that we have more concrete requirement here.
Okay. So we have about 12 minutes left in this time slot. I think we all are interested in federated query API or read API. Do we have enough time left that we can have a good discussion around that now, or should we maybe make that the focus of another breakout meeting?
Yeah, I think that maybe we don't have enough time for that talk, but Alex, do you think that we can have a brief
Yes,
introduction about that first?
let's use this time to just to discuss about the use cases and how we can use it. And so it's to, if you need in another meeting, we can schedule another way, but just to prevent situation like with the pool proposal that it was not ready actually at these use cases. So let's discuss here something maybe high level discussion about it. Is it okay?
About the read query API?
Yes.
Okay, yeah,
that'd be great.
I think that would be good.
Okay. So, Guan, do you want to start, or I will start it?
Yeah, I think that you can start.
So,
Do you want to share?
Yeah, it's you sharing. It's you can continue. It's okay, but please start from options 3. Actually, it's start from the scripts. You know, the idea of query API. It's even in the Federation documentation Fed2. You provide some examples, but you use the Git, you use scripts for the customer, and they based on kubeconfig information without any information about the cluster itself. For example, the status of the clusters. Fed2 has internal cluster registry, but the user don't have access to it. Is not able to get information from that. In addition, the scripts, actually it's commands. It's just it's imperative commands, not something like declarative. And in most cases, especially when we have distributed clusters, we think actually the idea to create the views that it's here is the first option. It's to change user experience, to provide that user can create declarative information, what he wants to get. For example, get nodes with specific conditions from all clusters. And this information can be periodically updated. So it's not just run command and wait for a timeout or wait, I don't know, some of the clusters can be not available on this time. So can you scroll down?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's maybe.
Alex, so can you please share? I think that I can stop share so that you can share by yourself.
Okay. This one. Yeah. So just a moment. Let's to provide the ability to customer create some kind of a view to create the view, so it can be read queries with information about the information from which cluster the information should be provided. For example, we can provide cluster selectors with match cluster names. That maybe not all clusters are relevant for the specific query. We can provide information about conditions from the cluster registry, that only clusters that are on health conditions will be queried. And in addition, here it's conditions that provide some kind of different modes. It can be one shot, just like a command from the script to get information, or it can be periodical with periodical updates. And other options can be something like event-based or with watcher-based, that the information will be synchronized. And here it's in the kind of information, what kind of information should be provided, like with the ports, nodes, or something else. So it's the idea, it's like complementary to the Federation capabilities. Currently, Federation CV2, please correct me, but it's mostly works on deployment, different objects. And here we can get information about status of these objects. So users can easily, from a single point and control and check the status of different clusters. So,
can I just pause you here for a second?
Yeah.
This seems very much a description of implementation rather than a justification for why this implementation is required. And I thought the focus was going to be on basically laying out the use case.
You know, from discussions with customers, when specialists and customers have different global distributed clusters, and one of the requirements that actually the customers or some cluster administrators started to create some kind of scripts to gather this information from distributed clusters, from the different clusters. And
right. I'm in no way am I questioning the idea that users with multiple clusters want to be able to have visibility into those clusters, but jumping from that to I want to create a Kube API that allows you to query clusters. I don't see the link there. I mean, we talked about this in the past, and it's like there's all kinds of different ways to provide visibility into Federation members. This is one possible way. And to me, the fact that I don't have a clear idea as to why this is justified suggests that there's information missing on the use case side of things. Am I the only one that feels that way? Is there anybody else who wants to comment?
Yeah, I had a similar comment. I looked at the document, and the use cases are basically, as far as I can tell, GKE features. And I stand corrected, but I believe that GKE did this just in the user interface. I haven't actually had a look at their API, but I think that all they did was they used the existing Kubernetes API to build a UI across multiple clusters. So yeah, similarly, I happen to think there are good use cases for a federated read API, but I agree that they're not expressed in the document.
So maybe we have to additional to provide more justification, but at least here, from applications or from scripts point of view, we can't use information from the cluster registry. It is part of Federation V2.
Sorry, I didn't quite understand that point. Could you just clarify? Do you say that users don't have access to the cluster registry?
Yes. For example, here it's in this example, I can theoretically at least provide information that the only clusters in the cluster conditions cluster OK can be queried. And clusters that are not are disconnected and not responded, we will not wait for a timeout to try to connect to these clusters.
So that's a filtering. Is that a proposed filtering on the server end?
Yes.
But so why would you not put that filter on a list operation against the cluster registry, for example? I'm not saying it's a better way of doing it. I'm not understanding the problem that you're articulating about not being able to get this information from the cluster registry.
Again, please correct me, but is it possible to get the information from Federation Cluster Registry directly? In Fed2?
What information are you talking about? Like the cluster registry is just a list of clusters and their endpoints. Federation also, like for push reconciliation, stores auth credentials for the clusters that you choose to join. There are concerns around just using those credentials raw against all the member clusters. Like this was discussed as per the documents that I believe you've had access to, around like, okay, I want to access these clusters. Whose credentials do I use? Do I use the credentials of the user who's invoking the query? Do I use, do I impersonate them? Do I give just kind of global access to everybody? Like, there were all kinds of concerns around authentication. So I don't think the answer is as simple as I'm just going to reuse exactly what Federation is using to interact with the clusters. I'm not saying you couldn't, but there seemed to be a lot of concerns from the SIGAUTH group about that approach. It makes sense why I'm raising that. Like yes, you want to use, some of the same idea of interacting with clusters, but I don't think it's as simple as just using it verbatim.
Okay, now I think I understand what you were saying earlier. You were saying that you cannot get the status out of the cluster registry because it doesn't know what the status is.
Correct, yes.
And the reason it doesn't know is because it doesn't have credentials to access the cluster and find out what its status is. Okay, now I understand. And so you want to put that status somewhere else by some other mechanism.
Yes.
So basically you want to solve the problem that the cluster registry folks did not or could not solve, but you still basically have the same problem, I think.
Okay.
I mean, you still have to have credentials to get to the clusters to find out what their status is. We've done that anyway in Cluster Federation because you can't really do anything else without it. So is that the motivation here? Okay, I understand now.
But by the way, in cluster registries that are part of Federation 2, do you update the cluster conditions, or it's not updated there?
I believe today we have not yet, because of the concerns that Paul, at least that Maru mentioned. Is that true, Maru? I think so.
When you talk about cluster conditions, that's actually a function of the federated clusters. So the cluster registry cluster is simply a list of API endpoints, effectively. And then the federated cluster is what Federation is using. And so there's an active controller that updates the federated cluster with cluster conditions. So if you wanted to create some sort of mechanism to query that, I mean, you just have access to the federated clusters and you can achieve what you're talking about here. But I'm not saying that's your only purpose for having read access, just this example is already available.
So do you think that all read operations can be done with I don't know, with scripts, with some kind of external mechanism without any server-side extensions?
Absolutely. I mean, the server-side thing might have utility, but it also it requires you to duplicate, like you have to have a comprehensive mechanism for querying versus, oh, you're just scripting kubectl commands, assuming you have access to the underlying clusters. I mean, there is kind of a general problem around authentication for multiple clusters. And I think if you're really serious about maintaining like a lot of clusters, a single sign-on solution would probably be a good idea. And then you could grant permissions to some sort of read, I don't know, agent, whatever, that would have access across all the clusters without involving any federation.
Yeah, I mean, just to be clear, this applies to Federation and in fact Kubernetes as well. There's nothing that Kubernetes does that you can't do with a bash script. The question is just how complicated your bash script gets and what permissions your bash script needs in order to get its job done. And so from one point of view, Kubernetes is really just a way of making your bash script simpler and taking away some of the credentials that you would need in order to be able to get the job done and putting them somewhere else. So the argument that you could do something with a bash script is not an argument for not doing, something in Kubernetes or something in Federation. Sorry, that was a slightly philosophical point, but did you understand what I was trying to get across?
Yeah, and maybe to implement common tasks.
Exactly. Yeah. So I think it would be useful for users to be able to find out the status of their clusters. And it seems like they can at the moment already by listing the federated clusters API type, and it'll tell them whether the clusters are healthy or not, I believe. Is that true?
That is true. It just occurred to me that I think the way that we run, like when you start the controller manager, I think it starts the cluster controller no matter what. We don't even offer the option to disable it. So if you were to run the Federation controller manager, disable, the push reconciler scheduling and DNS, you would still get cluster conditions for joint clusters.
Yeah. But then I think the next question was, can you, and this query we have in front of us on the screen is looking for nodes, I believe.
It's pods. It's under spec kind resource.
Okay.
Yeah, right. So
Okay, so the answer is that there is no way to do that at the moment in the Federation control plane, because the Federation control plane doesn't actually know anything about pods.
actually, so we want to create a federated query resource, and then depend on this resource to get all of the different kind of resources cross clusters, and we want to depend on the sub resource to fill in the resources in different clusters.
Yes, so I understand that part. I just want to make it clear to you, if your end goal is the things specified in the use cases at the top, which are all user interfaces and which are all provided today by GKE, I believe, none of that required any of the kind of stuff in this design. That is just a user interface on top of the existing Kubernetes API. So I just want to make sure that you're aware that you don't need to do any of this stuff to provide what you have in your use cases.
Yeah, so I posted the GKE kit here. Just want to give a clear picture about what GKE is doing now, so that I can just implement the same features like GKE, so that we can just query resources across different clusters. This is just a reference case for my use case.
To be clear, though, there's no suggestion in the GKE control panel of the implementation. I think it's very unlikely that they've implemented a Kubernetes API to access the status of underlying clusters. It's far more likely they're actually calling all the registered clusters. So to me, this, we want some feature to get access to this, but it doesn't suggest the implementation.
Yeah, I agree. And one other comment was just before we go into the details. So we struggled with this. We did a lot of this design earlier, and a lot of there are some fairly difficult technical issues to solve, like latency and asynchronous behavior and caching and permissions, as Maru mentioned. So you need to be pretty clear on what use cases you're trying to solve here. For example, if you just want a cluster administrator to be able to do an ad hoc query and get the status of their clusters or their nodes, and that happens fairly infrequently, then one design and implementation may be appropriate. If, however, your federation controllers, which need to perhaps know which pods are in which clusters to be able to make decisions, if they need access to that and they are perhaps polling or watching that information, that sort of suggests a very different implementation potentially. So I would encourage you, before you start designing anything, to just have a very clear understanding of what your actual use cases are and which ones you are not supporting. Because right now, the ones you have specified don't motivate for doing anything. But I assume there are some other ones. You mentioned one verbally of an administrator building a bash script to go and query all their clusters. Would they rather have the GUI that is in the user interface? In which case, should you just build it for him, for the administrator? Or would they rather have an API? In which case, should you design and build that? You know what I'm saying? Does that make sense?
Yes, but by the way, may I ask you, you mentioned that you discussed this queries, read queries in the past. Do you have some use case scenarios, requirements from that, or some in addition to the mailing list that I think you sent to one? Maybe somebody else knows additional.
Yeah, there were very long discussions and documents and threads around that. I believe they're all written down. I think I sent them all to Guang. I don't know if you've gone through them. I don't have them off the top of my head. It was a year or two ago, and I don't remember all of them.
Yeah, we do have some requirement, but I found that the previous discussion was based on Federation V1, so they may not fit into Federation V2 mode. Because
the user requirements are, make any difference. The difference between V1 and V2 is more about implementation. The use cases are
right. Yeah, right. Yes.
So the question is, well, so off the top of my head, I don't remember all of them, but other people did lots of work, and I don't have the documents in my head right now. But one use case is controllers that need that information from the clusters, or may need it. For example, how many nodes are there? How big are they? Is this thing going to schedule, etc. To a large extent, we got around those problems by making sure the controllers didn't need that information. But that was one original concern. Another one was simply, whatever software is running on top of Kubernetes that, lists nodes or pods or anything else to do whatever it does, wants it across all the clusters. And it doesn't want to have the credentials for, 100 clusters and to have to implement all the logic to go and query all the clusters and retry where necessary and all of that, and aggregate all the results together. It just wants to have an API endpoint that it queries and gets the answer just the same as a Kubernetes cluster. So that, I think that was, the latter was the main use case, but I don't know if that's your use case. So do you have a piece of software, for example, that runs on top of Kubernetes that does something like list nodes or pods to do something with them, and it can't run across multiple clusters today because we don't have this access via Federation? If you have such a piece of software, that would be useful to understand what it needs.
Okay, I think it's from both reviews we got the same feedback that we have to provide better use case explanation.
Oh, and just to be clear, you don't have to do anything. You can go and build this stuff tomorrow if you like.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
We're just trying to advise you. What you probably want to build is determined by what you want to use it for, and it's not clear what you want to use any of this stuff for, so we can't really suggest whether or how you should build it until we understand that. I guess that's maybe the best way of putting it.
Okay, yeah.
Cool. I'm going to have to run, guys. Thanks for putting.
Yeah, I also need to run. Please feel free to reach out to me on Slack, and we can find a time to talk a little bit further if you're interested in doing that on the use cases and requirements and prototyping design. Okay?
Yeah, sure.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your time.
You're welcome. Talk to you later, everybody. See ya.
See you.
Ciao.
Thank you. Bye.